Hi, everybody. Welcome to Photographer's Coffee Morning. Today we have Emma Alexander, an amazing producer and educator, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the business side of photography, the commercial space, advertising, and how to get access. So without further ado, Emma, could you tell us a little bit about you and your background in this industry?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here. So yes, I've had a really squiggly, amazing career. But essentially, I'm the co-founder of Wisern, which is a business development platform specifically for creatives. So we provide micro advice for creative micro businesses. And I'm also the founder of Mother Bran, which is a full service commercial production company. I actually trained as a photographer about what feels like a million years ago now. So I really have, and then realized really quickly this was not something that I loved, which was really confusing, actually. I've got to say, coming out of, doing a photography degree and coming out of that and thinking, this is my path. And then thinking, I don't know if I love this as much as I thought I did, was really confusing. So I've been on this really crazy, wiggly, squiggly career for a long time, working across syndication and licensing. I did my stint as a retoucher. I've worked in studios, and a large portion of my career was actually spent in advertising agencies as an art buyer and a producer before then making the leap into running my own production company, and then say moving into the space with Wisern about a year and a half ago. So that's my kind of potted 20-year career in 90 seconds.
Because you didn't actually talk yourself up quite enough there, I'm going to do some more of this for you.
Oh,
So Mother Bran, if you haven't already seen it, everybody listening, I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You should click it right now. And while we're talking, if you're not driving, you should definitely be looking at that, and you'll be able to see some of the wonderful work they've worked on. But actually, you've had collaborations with two of my all-time favorite brands. I absolutely love Bowers and Wilkins as a heritage UK company. Sound United are an amazing company that do some awesome stuff in the audio space. You've produced campaigns for Polestar, and honestly, check it out. You deserve to treat yourself to this. It's really cool work.
thank you.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that you started out as a photographer and it felt like an ill fit. But even more interestingly, you went to university for photography and then felt it was an ill fit, because part of the conversation I wanted to have was around the access to information and education in photography. Because I don't know how you felt about it, but for me, I know quite a few people that did photography at university, and it was literally useless, in the sense that they had no preparation for industry. They didn't know what they wanted to do or how to approach photography. Many of them hadn't even touched a full frame camera before. That there was just no access to the things that actually are trappings of the photographic industry. And part of why I was really excited to talk to you is that, one, you've got the industry experience that most people don't have and nobody is willing to share. And two, in simple terms, Wisden's giving you hourly access to people that know these things intimately. And that is something that people need to know exists. Because if it wasn't for a few people tapping me on the shoulder and saying, look, maybe you need to think about licensing, I wouldn't even know licensing existed. And those kinds of gatekeeping activities that are happening in some agencies, in some businesses that are hiring photographers, it's down to us as an industry to try and get that out of the way. What was it that led to starting Wise, and what made you think that, you know what, we need to provide some more insight into this industry? Where did that begin?
The catalyst for Wisern, well, go back a little bit. I've been a creative mentor for a long time. So I've been working organically with photographers, various creatives, but also through structured programs as well. There's a fantastic organization called She Says, which supports female and non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid creatives within the industry and within the sort of the creative industry at large. And they have a wonderful program called Who's Your Mama? So I've been with Who's Your Mama for a long time, and I think it's like every 6 months do various placements with them. So and various other people I've been done things with, essentially structured work, but also these own kind of lovely organic relationships that came through with established creatives as well as new and young creatives. Giving back, I suppose, has been really important for me for a long time. And actually, this is another penny drop moment I had during the pandemic when I realized that my values were really important to the kind of work I was creating and my business. We can come on to that a little bit later, but I had this kind of moment where I thought, what am I doing? What am I doing? My work's disappeared. Where is this going? What's my purpose? And I sat down and I really thought about what is important to me, not what do I think should be important to me as a business, or as an independent kind of creative, what have you. What is actually really important for me? And I've done voluntary work since I was 13, on and off for years across various things, and it's really, really important to me. Actually, volunteering, sharing, transparency, all those things are actually things that are part of my personal being. And I thought, why shouldn't this be at the forefront of my my business? It's my business. I'm finally running my own business. I don't have to do what anyone else tells me. So that kind of values exercise was really important for me to realize that actually I had full ownership of what I was doing with Mother Bran and where I was taking it. And actually, some things that are really important for me as a person, a human being, can actually sit at the underpin of my business. So I thought, right, that's really interesting. Where do I take that? And I'd written a workshop for the photography and video show, the 2020 show, which clearly didn't happen as the world imploded. But I had this workshop and I thought, what do I do with this now that this isn't running? And it was actually about creative resilience, about overcoming isolation and retaining the love for your craft when you work on your own.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. It was ridiculous. And it had come through all these conversations I was having in a mentorship capacity, in a kind of helping my mates out capacity, sitting down, having these deep chats with people saying, where are you going? What are you doing? Lots of people, established creatives, 20 years they've been doing it, saying, I've lost the love. So all this kind of work came together. Started to research this talk, this workshop. And then, the world imploded. So I thought, right, what do I do with this? Well, I've got to share it. So I started, it was partly a PR exercise, but it was also a giving exercise as well. What do I do with this? And in the end, I ended up sharing that workshop with over 1,000 people during the course of lockdown. And then as that sparked more conversations. So as I started having more conversations with more people, how they were feeling, how they were doing, I was reaching out to a lot of creators saying, you guys are on your own. What's happening right now? How are you kind of navigating this storm of a pandemic? And I started to realized that lots of people were struggling. Lots of people were not, living in London, what have you. People were all over the UK, all over the world. So we started running these accountability sprints, project management stuff. And so we devised these little 2-week sprints where groups of us would get together, we'd set our intentions, and then, we'd have check-ins, and you finish really, really simple. But you're working in a cycle. You have one common goal, one thing to go and do, and you are very binary about it. Yes, no. Is it done? Yes, no. And the accountability of bringing people together to support them and work through it was great. So I started running those. And then the problems that people were bringing me, I started to see real patterns in that. At the same time, more people were coming to me and saying, hi, I want to work with you. Like, how do I do that? I thought, oh God, all these different arms are kind of taking off. And then looking at the questions people were bringing to me, I realized I wasn't the best person sometimes to answer them, which, I know you might be shocked. I don't actually know everything. Sometimes it's stunning for myself to not realize that. But, I started thinking, I have this amazing network. I've worked in this business for, like nearly 20 years. I know loads of people. So I started partnering people up with better people to talk to. And then it just felt like a complete no-brainer. People want this service. They want to access these kind of people. They're finding it really hard to get in front of, and the penny drop moment was there. And just thought, this is something much bigger than 15-minute zooms around a table. There's something really, really powerful and important here that we can help people with. So that's the kind of long-winded version of how it came about. But yeah, since then it has just it's just snowballing and snowballing.
A lot of what you're talking about hits really, really close to home for me, because this podcast started out as a room on Clubhouse. Like every day, at least once a day, we would have an hour where we had anybody that wanted to come and talk about the things that mattered to them and the stresses they were going through during the pandemic. There were an awful lot of us that had just had major changes in circumstances. And like me, I'd only been freelance because I'd been working employed as a commercial photographer before that for about 6 months. And it was a real blow. And I kept thinking, like, well, maybe other people feel the same. And obviously over time we realized that, yeah, we're all in the same boat. Like, we could be working in different parts of the industry. You could be a wedding photographer, or you could be doing like small scale corporate work or advertising. It didn't matter. Nobody was working. And having that support was massive. But the thing that hit me hardest about what you just said was that you were already having those conversations around a coffee table, or you were doing those things already. You were having closed door discussions with people that you trusted and cared about. about how to grow and progress. And a big thing that's come up for me recently has been access. Because, like you said, not everybody is in London. I'm definitely not. My nearest major market's Manchester. Um, but that all the conversation, all the vernacular, the language that's used is heavily built around London's ad industry. And even having done work in that space, it still feels like a foreign language. So the fact that you're taking time and energy to be a translator and to think, well, here is what people say it is, but this is what it means, that's enormous. And I actually had some questions about like how people engage with your services, because frankly, like I've looked at it and it's something that I want to look at as well. You've got some amazing people on there on your panel. Like you obviously have got a huge amount of ad experience, and probably if I was going to start anyway, it might be with you. But you've also got Tom Barnes from the Exposed Negative podcast, who's again a wealth of information, especially on strobe lights and all that kind of stuff and technical photography stuff. But what I wanted to understand a little bit more is kind of how you the kind of problems that you see with new entrants into the industry. Like, do you frequently work with newer photographers through Wisern or through Mother Bran? What kind of common complaints, common issues do you see when people first start working in the advertising space?
Yeah. So on the Wisern factor, generally we find the people coming and using Wisern are slightly more established, partly because of the cost element, but they, it for them it's a really natural kind of business development part of their own business development tool. I need to get from A to B. This is how I get there. Now the cost is obviously prohibitive potentially to new creatives coming into the space who might not, be able to afford the service, which is precisely why, things like this, doing podcasts like this for me is so important, because it's that sharing space again. I think everyone should have access to really good information, especially really niche information. You can spend hours going through Google, and I guess one of the things that brought us to keep Wisern at the moment as a one-to-one service, not a one-to-many, and not a pre-recorded video service as well, which I think we'll get onto that later. It's on our roadmap to come down the further down the line, because I think that is really important, either for low barrier, or we're even talking about just making our video content free always, to continually keep supporting new creators coming in. But watch the space for that one. But the thing that puts me off the video courses is it's somebody else's idea of what you want. It's not to say they're not valuable. I have bought loads of courses. I think I've finished don't think I've finished any, but we'll gloss over that. I have bought loads.
This is a point of contention for me,
Is it?
like because I don't know if you know this or not, but that generally there was a survey done of all online learning. If a course's service is only online, the dropout rate is 93%. So only 7% of the people that actually buy these courses will get past the introduction. And as a
Mm.
result, one of the major hurdles that you find with online education is that essentially it's front loaded. The introduction's amazing, the first module's amazing, the second module's slightly worse, and then as you get through the course, it becomes useless because companies doing it at scale realize that people aren't going to finish it, so they want to give the perception these courses are incredible. And then when people drop out because they come across an issue that they can't handle on their own, or there's some kind of like outside of the kind of contained time that you've given for education that comes in and takes that away, people never restart.
Mm.
As a result, I'm 100% with you. One-to-one is, as far as I'm concerned, the gold standard. So if you're telling me that you're still offering gold, then that's awesome as far as I'm concerned. And
Yeah.
especially if you're also giving somebody an onboarding method as well, that's incredible.
Well, for me, it was more about what you can go to Google. If you don't want to pay for it, fine, go on Google. It's totally cool. There is lots and lots of information out there. Go on YouTube, loads of information. I'm not suggesting we're reinventing the wheel or anything. However, what we don't have, people, time is really precious for people actually, and I'm the same. If I've got a question, I want to pick up the phone, get my answer, and move on. I don't want to sit through a 12-week course of somebody else's ideas of like what I think is going to be useful for you. Here's all the information I've got. I hope you find it useful. Making those connections, they come through human interaction. It's like talking and conversation is so important to bounce ideas off it. And going back to the idea of isolation, this is why one of the key things I think affecting creatives, new, established, whatever, it's isolation. Because as freelancers, when we go on set, often it's really collaborative. There's lots of people milling around, even small shoots. You've got photographer, assistant, possibly a stylist, the clients there, blah blah blah. You've got a core little team of people. It's fantastic. It's lovely. It's collaborative. It's buzzing. You've got the energy flowing, everything. And then you go home, and 90% of what you do in your day to day is on your own. And I think that's really, really a big key thing for me. One of the major things I think affecting everybody, pandemic or not, is actually isolation. And one of the things I do talk about is this nurturing your network, understanding who is in your sphere. Actually, it's funny, after this, I'm actually presenting a workshop for Enterprise Nation. It's a free workshop. You'll probably find it online after this. But it's about how to build a board of personal board of advisors, which feels really grand, right? And kind of overkill if you're a micro business or a limited company of one, or a sole trader. Having a board feels like complete overkill. But actually, personal board of advisors at its core is just understanding where are the levels of support that you get. And it's a really, really interesting little exercise to go through to kind of look at who is in your sphere of support. And it's even more powerful if you have like a goal. So, you set your North Star for the quarter, 6 months, year, whatever it is. If I want to achieve this one thing, right, my period of growth, and you can be PAYE, it doesn't matter. It's all about, the journey you're on. So you know what your North Star is. And then really looking at your these kind of circles, your inner circle, and that's people like your friends, your family, people you talk to all the time, but they're really more focused on your what we call psychosocial kind of element, your happiness, your kind of well-being. My mum is always going to love what I do, right? It's her job. Even if she doesn't love it, it's her job to go, oh, that's nice, dear. Oh, well done, you. And that's her role. That's amazing. I need that. I'm like unwavering cheerleader. However, when we're looking at evaluating risk or pivoting, growth within your career or even yourself, sometimes the people who are closest to us can actually really hinder our decision making precisely because they love you and they care about you. So, I think it's really important to understand who are your go-to people for different stages of growth, stages of kind of career development. Where are the people is it like, mentors, coaches, your own family and friends, peers, ex-colleagues, all the way up to role models who you might never speak to, but they're inspiring. It's a completely one-way conversation. Beyonce doesn't care what I'm doing, but if I can think, what would Beyonce do right now? That's going to help me find the fire maybe and kind of, take a risk or do whatever it is. So really mapping out on kind of paper, who are my personal board of advisors? Who are my go-to people? And you might want to like formalize some of those conversations. You might want to go to some people and say, hey, I'm going through this period of growth for the next 6 months. Would you be on my board of advisors, as it were? Can I call on you for once a month to have a chat for accountability, for kind of lifting your confidence to know that those people are there as a sounding board. But yeah, personal board advisor, really, really interesting little kind of tool and really underused. People don't, I think you tend to get yourself in a situation and think, where do I go now? Rather than preempting it. Actually, the first, you talked about what advice do I give to new creators. One of the things I will say to new creators is get a lawyer and get an accountant now, or as a business, get it out, because you won't know you need it until you need it. And then when you do need it, you need it like an hour ago. And you haven't got time to be kind of like calling around, making those intro calls. It's like, actually, do you know what? Earmark a lawyer and have them on your speed dial, because when you need them, and I've needed them twice, I've needed them for quite serious situations and serious legal advice. And it was great to just be like, hello, right. So that's actually my my little bit of advice. Get a lawyer, get an accountant.
That's an amazing segue into the like an area that I wanted to cover in a moment. But really briefly, I just wanted to kind of explain, dwell on this idea of a board of advisors. Like most of the people in this audience will already be doing that. If you've ever come to one of the coffee morning roundtables, you're doing that. Like essentially, you're giving yourself a sounding board. You're meeting people that will give you an honest opinion and an educated opinion at that as to whether or not your work is actually going to meet the standard you're trying to hit, which is ultimately what we're talking about. And I want to kind of explain this because you mentioned that this could be cost prohibitive for people, but looking at the Wisern site, your session started £150.
Mm.
That's an absolute bargain as far as I'm concerned. So for anybody that's thinking, oh no, maybe it's not too expensive, you can afford this. Like you can. This is going to be an investment in your business. You're not going to have to do this daily. This isn't going to be a frequent expense, but if you need somebody with specific insight, what they're offering you is affordable access to that insight. If you do not have somebody in your network that can tell you about licensing or can tell you about possible legal pitfalls or can say simple things to you like, you need an accountant for this, that's available. And there's somebody that's taking time out of an already successful business that's making a lot of money elsewhere, that's working at the top of the industry, that's offering that. And I think that you probably do yourself down a little bit to say that it's not affordable, because I think that even if you were fresh out of uni, you could afford that. And frankly, you putting that price on the site would make me feel a lot more comfortable, because if I know that I need X amount of time investment, I can budget for that now. I know that I can make sure that I have access to you for the 8-10 hours of time that I would need to conclude that problem. And maybe that's not the way you prefer to work. I'm not trying to dictate your methodology, the way you work on these calls, but the point being that you said it was expensive and could be prohibitive. I would argue that it isn't, and this is priced incredibly aggressively. And especially for the people that are thinking about potentially transitioning away from weddings, for example, that may already have an established business but in completely the wrong sector for them, this is actually a really affordable solution.
We have a lot of people who, on a monthly basis, over the course of one every month for 3 months or 6 months, we're going to work on this. And other people who use it for quarterly check-ins. Like every quarter, we're going to sit down, we're going to review where we are before. So yeah, absolutely. I think I need to be kind of aware that actually, some people are, with the cost of living crisis, people are facing real genuine financial hardship. But there is, I know what you're saying. If you are looking at this as a business expense, absolutely. And this is the way people do. You would go and pay for a course on, I don't know, to do something technical. Like the idea is investing in yourself. But we had a really amazing woman recently who had an incredible opportunity to bid on a project, to pitch on a project, and she knew that her pricing was probably a little bit out. She got kind of comfortable with some clients, blah blah blah, and she didn't have the confidence to go in at a massive rate. She sat down with our pricing expert, and she basically compiled a couple of gold, silver, bronze quote, went off, pitched to the client, and she did win the job. Really pleased to say she did win the job. So for her, and she said that investment was just phenomenal. Having that time to sit down and talk about my problem in that context of this, it's not pitching out to go for a coffee and pick someone's brains anymore. It's like, actually sit down with me for an hour and talk about me and my business and my problem, and then walk away with it solved. Yeah, it's really powerful. But I think those other networks, you've got to look at those broader networks as well, where we are just groups and kind of, a couple of amazing WhatsApp groups, for example. Those are also really important parts of your your support network and your advisory board, as it were. Being able to tap into those specific niches, those real hive minds, as it were, and know what you're going to get from them. It's really important. It's really important, because I say isolation I think is a massive problem for so many of us, myself included.
And even beyond isolation, because a lot of people have like a genuine support network. Like you said, your parents can be supportive. You can feel unisolated in like a family sense, but still feel isolated professionally. And especially when it comes to moving into a new market. And that kind of like neatly moves us into the second part that I wanted to talk about. Because as you mentioned, like you said, get a lawyer, because like when you need them, you really need them. And actually, it's probably a good time to talk about some personal experience too. So for me, like when I came out of being employed as a commercial photographer, obviously in those situations, you're not really party to discussions around things like licensing, around contractual agreements and usage. And for me, that was an absolutely steep learning curve. And it was one that agencies were all too ready to take advantage of. And obviously in your position with Mother Bran, you're in a situation where you are kind of in the middle in those situations. When you provide art buying services, you are both purchasing and representing somebody else. So for the Cliff Notes version, for anybody that doesn't know, the production company very often will take care of things like the logistics on set, like quoting for different elements to shoot, helping put the structure of things together. But you're also interacting with the creatives, so people like photographers, videographers, illustrators, artists, and designers, and the client, the ad agency, or ultimately potentially the in-house marketing department that needs more help.
Mm.
So sitting in that middle position, how do you see your role in helping photographers to get access to this without taking advantage? Do you feel like there's a risk of agencies potentially being predatory in the way that they compensate for services? And does the responsibility fall to a photographer to make sure they know their craft well enough to push back if they're sent a contract that would compromise their rights?
That's a really interesting question, actually. And yes, there's a lot going on in that space. So, usage is a really, it's such a minefield. And I know, like, conversations I have with photographers now who've been doing this for like 15 years, and they're still like, oh, I've been offered this. I don't know what to say. Like, it's so kind of put a finger in the air and hope something sticks. Like, it does really feel like that, even to me now. There is no kind of golden rule, unfortunately, but there are kind of parameters you can put in place, like for your own, I don't know, like scoping out what you value would put against it. But it's really, really difficult. It is also not the lucrative space it once was. You know, the kind of days of going, oh, we'll charge 80 grand for the usage. It just doesn't happen now. The advertising space has changed dramatically in the last few years. I've been doing this job I've been in the space for 20 years now, which makes me feel like 106. But and I've seen a lot of changes during that time. Obviously, the advent of digital, the advent of social media, it is a humongous change. One of my first jobs, for enough, was actually on the picture desk of a daily paper, and they used to they still had the labs. Like, they just brought in the last photographers that got digital cameras when I arrived, but they still had the labs there and everything. Used to go and do the films. That's how old I am. But with that change and with the rise of certainly social media, especially, actually, it's really opened the door to new creatives being found, which I think is at once really, really exciting and really, really dangerous in some respects. And what I mean by that is, we've seen people kind of putting their work on Instagram, not so much anymore. This kind of organic rise to fame doesn't really happen anymore. But originally, when Instagram first kind of kicked off, yeah, you saw people creating beautiful, beautiful work, and quite rightly being approached by brands, being picked up, getting notoriety, really raising their own profile, and getting into the industry that way. And I have absolutely no problem with that. I think that's amazing. I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh no, Instagram stars." No, creativity is creativity. Having an eye is having an eye, and if you can create beautiful work, I think that's amazing.
I could not agree with you more.
The downside with that was there was definitely a space where people like that were being taken advantage of, but not being paid rates that were competitive to people in the same position, within the same landscape, and of course not charging because they didn't know about it, and not being offered usage. And this is the thing. And I guess my one advice where people say, "Oh, well, they want to lump it all in. What should we do?" My big advice is to everyone is to charge usage. Like, it is a legal thing in the UK. It's not a grey area. It really isn't. Copyright is not a grey area. It's very black and white. There is the 1998, Copyright Design and Patents Act, which, if you do have insomnia, is a really good read. You take that to bed, sort your right out. But what it says very clearly somewhere in there is that the person who creates the image, creates the artwork, retains the copyright. You can license it away for use forever. That's fine, but you own the copyright, and that is super clear. It is black and white. It is really clear. So actually, the licensing is a real thing. Like, it's not something that we've all. And I used to get pushback I still get pushback from clients, actually, really experienced clients. You think, come on. And they're like, what is this usage business? And you're like, come on, this isn't your first rodeo. They're just pulling a fast one all the time.
In my case, I didn't realize this until afterwards, but they have two contracts, one for photographers that know about usage and one for those that don't. And the one that did not allow for usage essentially gave them unlimited usage rights for all images produced during the course of the shoot. And again, obviously, coming down the road at the time, you don't know any different, because, like you said, if you're not at the table with the people that have that knowledge, you don't know.
Yeah.
And the other side of it as well is the client makes it seem as if that's the only option. It's my way or the highway. Like you said, you're having agencies that do know better that are
Mm-hmm.
saying that to find out whether you will waive it. And that kind of behavior is, for me at least, it feels gross. And it's actually genuinely dissuaded me from pursuing higher end projects because I know that on my own, I don't necessarily have the mental stamina to get
Mm.
through those kinds of objections. And again, I'm going to go back to Wisern. That's why £150 is the best money you could possibly spend in that situation, because you're going to make a hell of a lot more than 150 quid
Yeah.
for your licensing. So I feel so strongly that that kind of behavior is happening and it is
Mm.
not talked about. And one of the reasons I was so happy that you just brought it up is because, like you said, it's agencies that have been around for a long time. They are in the habit of having to pay for usage, but they're also fully prepared to take advantage if you do not know your industry. So again, not to kind of digress too much, but again, like you said, you're having that conversation with clients, you're pulling them back up and say, well, hang on a second, you know better.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that conversation go?
I mean, sometimes it goes really well. They're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense." Sometimes it's like pulling teeth. It's really difficult because, on the one hand, budgets are shrinking. We know this. On that, they are. On the other hand, they're not. On the other hand, I can see an obscene amount of money flowing. So the last job I did in an ad agency before I left, which is, we're going back a few years now, but it was a full 360. So TV, TV, print, digital, the works. But the production budget, not the agency fees, the production budget was £8 million. So, there was a brand out there that was saying, right, this work's going to last us for 2 years, but they're willing to pay 8 million quid, not even for our agency's fees, but just to actually create these things, these assets. Now, there were celebrities involved and everything else. So, yes, that money gets eaten up really quickly. But the stills budget, I think, was 350 or 375,000. That's what I was managing. So there is, people do have money. That's a bit of an anomaly. I must confess, I haven't worked on an £8 million budget in Mother Bran yet. There's always time.
Is that not just a weekly occurrence for you, just constantly
Yeah, just
handling
like.
8-10 million? Like it's
But
nothing.
we have had campaigns at Mother Bran which are over 300 grand, which we've handled. Which is a sizable amount of money to put behind a campaign which doesn't have TV, which is interesting. So stills and video. So I feel like it's a juggling act. There are brands that do have money, there are brands that do not have money, and there are brands in the middle who have money but want to put it elsewhere, who aren't just taking the piss. So it is a juggling act of knowing who's, I don't know where it lies, and it's really case by case. And unfortunately, a big brand will have maybe 5, 6, 7 different agencies they work with as well. Cadbury's, for example, I'm not working with Cadbury, so this is not a real example, but a big brand like that, a real household name, they will have a big above the line agency which will do all their kind of really set the creative strategy, the big campaign. They'll do the TV work, all that kind of stuff, the billboards, the bus wraps, all the kind of out of home things. Then they'll have another agency that will do what's below the line, which is all the kind of in-store or trade stuff, maybe some direct mail. Then they might even have a shopper agency that does all the in-store stuff. Then they've got a digital agency, and then an experiential agency, the PR agency, and it's all kind of merging around together, and they've all got different budgets to work on. So the poor brands, I do feel for them. They might have this 8 million quid, but they have to kind of carve bits off left, right, and centre. And actually, it's a really big pot to manage. So I feel like some people do have cash, some people don't have cash, and it's just a case of being confident. But that's really, really hard because you have no idea. Again, the transparency in this business, you have no idea what anyone else is charging. Like, as a producer, I have no idea what anyone else is charging. I could be charging, grossly undercharging for our services, or I could be coming in way over the top. Photographers have no idea who else is in the mix and what they're charging. And you really don't. And I feel like so much of the decisions that we make, and so many people I speak to, are making decisions based on fear, based on that kind of anxiety, and anxiety being, the fear of what might happen because we just don't know. So I think there's so much anxiety and there is so much fear around it. And there's so much wrapped up in having the confidence to think, I'm willing to stand my ground here. I'm willing to let this job go. If by pushing back. It's funny. I remember a couple of years ago, I got offered a job to do with an ad agency, and I didn't really want to do it. Didn't want to do it. So I priced myself completely out of the market. I was like, oh, everyone else is charging this. I'm double a day, so take it or leave it. And they went, all right. I was like, oh shit. And I kind of priced myself at the point, where they had so much trust in me because I was going above and beyond. And I knew there was someone else who'd also gone for this job as well, who was like a head of department. And I felt like she was so much more experienced than me. But, it wasn't just about pricing. When we all had meetings, I asked the right questions. But ultimately, I priced myself out. And then I priced a point where I was like, if you do pay that, I will happily do this job because it's worth it to me. But so I think there is that part of being confident in what your own value is. I mean, this is, oh my god, it's going into a real mindset space of how do you determine your own value? How do you put a figure on your own value? How do you price an idea? I mean, that's something one of our experts on Wisern, Dave Bonagreedy, a real Hackney Dave, talks about. How do you price an idea? How do you put value on an idea? It's so crazy. But I think actually, one of the things I say to people sometimes is to have a little folder. This is really cheesy, but it really works. Have a little Google Doc or a folder, and when you get nice feedback from someone, you put it in that folder, you put it in that document, wherever it is, and occasionally you go back and you read it. When you know that you have to really dig deep and find some confidence, or you're having the wobbles, or someone's pushing back, and you're like, no, I'm going to stand my ground with this. You go and read all the nice things that people have said about you, and the quality of your work, and the thank you so much, that was amazing. And you take that and you use that to kind of bolster your decision making. But yeah, there you go. Pricing yourself out. I think there's actually a funny little. Sorry, I was going to say there's a funny little formula that my husband and I came up with years ago. The 3 Ps. Which I've talked about this before, but it's like that triangle: time and cost quality triangle. But it's the 3 Ps of validating a job. We used to use it in PAYE when we were employed, and now actually we kind of use it to validate jobs when they come in. But essentially, it's price, people, and project. And you can't have one of them. You have to have two. One is not enough. Money is never enough. You can work on a fairly crappy, not very exciting job, but get paid handsomely and work with wonderful people. That's fine. I can get over that. Some people, maybe they need all three, but for me, I can get over that. I can get paid nothing to work on my dream job, for whatever that is. For people, that's the Nikes, the Adidas, the whatever, the big jobs, with incredibly inspirational people, or exciting, or a lovely team, and get paid nothing. That, for me, that's fine. I can make that decision. But you've got to look at everything with those 3 Ps. What does this job mean to me? And actually, if it's just money, you've got to question whether that's actually enough to drive you through. So there you go. My favourite little validation tool, the 3 Ps.
I think you're right about finding the right balance of team, but I also think that this isn't just a mindset issue. It's a possibility problem. Like, we don't often get access to the people that have their hands on an £8 million budget, and like you said, even in your circles, that would be a rarity. But the point being that if you are living in a small town in Cornwall, you may not know that there's an agency in London that's handling an £8 million budget. So when you're dealing with a brand that may have like national, international appeal, you may not know that those are the kinds of budgets that are being thrown around. That's the money that they've got to spend. And you might not even know this is worth pursuing. Because to win that kind of work, you have to have a portfolio that can deliver. You have to show that you can manage. And obviously, like you said, in your case, you're involved because the logistics are complicated. That's the entire reason that production companies are there. It's to take the stress away from the creative and to try and make it easier. But I don't think it's mindset as much as it is knowledge. Like, if you'd gone back to me 10 years ago and told me when I was working in-house for a company that I could be making, I could have access to companies with a £375,000 photography budget, I would have left real quick. Like, just plain and simple, I'd have been gone. Because those same companies you're talking about were the ones using my work. But the point is that because I was working for that company as a salaried employee, at that stage, I don't have the option to license that work or even use it in the future. So I think that, again, this goes back to the value of what you're doing at Wisern. And this is not meant to be an hour-long pitch for Wisern, but the reason I'm talking it up so much is because I keep thinking back to when I was in that situation. What would this have meant to me as a photographer, as a creative? And I think this conversation says a lot. Like, photographers don't know what other photographers charge. And I've been shocked a few times. I've seen contracts for television companies where they're paying an unlivable amount of money for what essentially amounts to full production and promotion for their shows, and
Yeah.
been disgusted. But what the conversation that then doesn't happen is that that's a promotional tool for you. It means that you're seen on the bus and you don't pay for the bus. Maybe your name's not on it, but you can point to that and say, like, have you seen such and such campaign, and say that was me. And even understanding the lengths that people will go to win attractive jobs, the prices people will work for, you don't know that until you have the conversation, and realizing that sometimes you're right, that I don't like the job tax is the main reason that we can stay in business, because like the jobs that you really like, a lot of people are very willing to take a haircut on their rate. So if you're normally working at 1,500 quid a day, you might do 150 if it's something that you absolutely need in your portfolio, just as an example. And on licensing as well, like, this is something that, as you said, that the law is clear on it. But for most photographers here, there's that worry that, am I going to lose the work with this client in the future if I don't hold my ground on it? And again, it's not mindset, it's lack of understanding. Like, what is the situation? Will I then lose this client if I push back on it? Will I lose this job that we've negotiated and a price that I was happy with before understanding that this was going to be the situation? And like you said, it's not just mindset; it's understanding, and you're giving people access to that. So this is meant to be a very intentional plug for that. But also, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the way that you've seen licensing change as well, because obviously the traditional model is it's territory, it's media, it's length of time. So if you're using something in the UK only, and it's only going to be used on their own website and their own social media channels, and they're only targeting people from the UK, that would typically have been like included in the rate that you would give as standard usage. It would be agreed ahead of time, and you get a year of it for basically the price of entry. But then beyond that, you would then calculate how much more it would cost, say, if they wanted to run it in print or run like a billboard advertising campaign on it or roll it out to the States as a primary target audience. But the big thing that's changed for me, and one of the things that I've had pushback on quite a lot, is how do you then deal with social media usage? Because obviously they can't control where that's going to go. Does this mean that we always have to be charging for worldwide usage for every campaign? Like, how do you navigate those kinds of situations? Have you lost me?
Yeah, I lost you there. I think, well, I guess what your question was. For me, it's about being really, really clear, really, really clear with the client. And actually spelling everything out. Again, going back to your earlier question about what's advice would you give to people? My first bit of advice to give to people is actually to have your penalty on the bottom of your invoice. Actually, two things. One, put the date when your invoice is due for payment, so it's super clear. And two, put a penalty down the bottom. It's 30 days, not it's strictly 30 days, and I think it's an 8% penalty, and I have enforced that. I have reissued invoices month on month on month until they've paid. And I tell you what, one, I was accelerated, and two, they paid my penalty charges. So definitely use that and enforce it. And I don't think there's any risk with that. My argument with that is we don't mess around when it comes to money. No one messes around when it comes to money. And, it shows that you are a professional and that you know your business. You're not kind of making a fuss. You are a strict professional. I'm going to come and do a great job for you, and I expect to be paid for that. So that's my advice for younger business, any creators actually. Second thing is being really clear with the usage as well. Just being really, really clear about what's covered and what's not covered. Don't let anybody, make an assumption or leave anything to chance, because the fact is that it's not going to go in your favor. They go, oh, I didn't realize. Oh, does it? On an invoice, you put the shoot service. You put usage, outline the usage on your invoice, outline the usage on your quote, on your estimate. So it's always super clear. And then I would also potentially agree figures up front. If there's any question, and you can put it to them, if you don't think you're going to use, you might want to use print. Let's agree a figure now for print. And actually, that's usually more for businesses. I say to agree that up front, because you're the one that has the power over them in future with that. But anyway, I would also outline that up clear, so everyone's really clear. So actually, they know they've got an option as well. I think it's really helpful to give it to them. You know what? You can use this. It's only going to cost you whatever it is, whatever you agree. I had a lady do this a few years ago. She was an ambassador for a I can't remember, like it was a drinks company, and she would shoot for them one or two social media kind of shots a month for their Instagram. Great. And she's like, I really love working with them. Really want to work with them. I'm like, well, why don't you ask for more work? And she was like, oh, I don't know. Anyway, so we went through this whole process, and she kind of pitched an idea for Christmas for them. They went for it. Then they came back and said, we want to run it in print. Is that right? And she's like, yeah, there's the fee. And they were like, oh, we didn't realize. She's like, well, no, I'm doing social media for you. It sits on your social. That's what we've agreed. And to run it in print. And it was really nominal. I think it was like 100 quid or something she charged them. But the fact is, she charged them. And it set that line in the sand, set that precedence of like, no, this is what you're paying for. This is what the extra is. And then she went back and asked for more work and got it. So being really, really clear, you have loads of opportunities to outline what is covered and what isn't. And yeah, as you say, usage it's the media, it's territory, and it's duration. So, it's where is it going to be seen, who is going to see it, and for how long. And it is really difficult. I mean, running a quarter page ad in the back of a kind of local newspaper in Manchester is very different to running something on a billboard in the States. Completely different set of eyes. But I think it comes back again to value. Absolutely comes back to value, and understanding that what you're doing, you want by creating commercial work, you are literally selling on behalf of a client. Like what you're doing quite literally has actual value to their business. They need to promote their service, they need to make sales, and they need your skill to do that. Because frankly, if they could do it in-house, they would. So they need your eye, your creative take, your skills and experience to come and bring this idea literally to life in a way that speaks to their customers and makes them want to rush into wherever it is and buy tons of whatever they're selling. Like that is the reality. So what you're making has absolute huge amounts of value. So do you know what? If they're going to make whatever turnover a year off the back of your product, the back of your skills and experience, then do you know what? Yes, you can bung me $1,000 for usage. 100%. You can charge whatever it is for the relicensing of this in different spaces. You've got to remember that this value thing. What you're doing is something they cannot do themselves. Otherwise, they would be. If you could do it with an iPhone in the corner of an office, that's exactly what someone would be doing. So, yeah, again, it sort of does come back to mindset and confidence, which is really hard. If you've lost a couple of jobs, I mean, pitching in ad agencies, we'd always triple bid. We'd always have 3 photographers coming in and putting in quotes, and sometimes treatments as well. Asking people to do treatments is a big investment of time, but and then to not get that work is really, really hard. So if you're going through that process, one of the things I always advise is going back and asking for feedback, like really pushing the art buyer and the producer for feedback as to why you're not getting that job. And it's hard because they're so often on to the next thing, like, oh, we've ordered the job, we're getting on the job now, we're doing the shoot. They're in that zone. But really push for feedback. I think you really, really deserve it. But yeah, you cut out slightly before. I lost you slightly, so I didn't hear your question about usage. But did that answer your question?
That was a perfect. So you actually answered 2 extra questions, which I love. That's awesome. Because the one I had was actually the one you answered primarily about how do you deal with licensing. Like now that social media is more prevalent, obviously you can't really set territory because everybody's going to see it. So it was kind of the question about how do you tackle that with clients. But to be frank, I actually prefer the answer that you gave. Okay. So, but if you want to answer that, feel free.
Well, there is a thing about social media, and again, like you say, it is open. You can go and see, I don't know, Sony's Japanese page as you can their UK page, like completely. But as a general rule, if it is the UK page of BMW or whatever, you treat it as the UK territory. Even though people can see it, it is unlikely that anyone in kind of, I don't know, Australia is following the UK page of something they probably can't buy in that territory. So, you tend to look at it in that way. We've done some work for Foot Locker, for example, and they have a the main page, which tends to be, it's global, but tends to be a US focus. Then they have a Europe page as well. So you approach that as Europe wide, including the UK. So there's different ways of looking at it. I think you can sort of apply that territory thing there. Although in theory, of course, if you're searching for hashtags or whatever, it could be seen everywhere. It's a bit of a grey area, that one.
No, absolutely. And I think that's ultimately the reason why people push back. Like, do I need worldwide licensing for this? When actually what you're saying is the intent's more important. Like, if their intention is to build a presence inside the UK and that's the purpose of the campaign, you could, within your right, stick to your guns and say, well, no, everyone in the world's going to see it. I'll charge you this much for it. But again, it's having the conversation and being transparent about it. I also really like what you said about putting penalties on your invoice, because again, like very often you'll find that people aren't aware. Like if photographers aren't aware, there may be some SMEs, like small, medium enterprises that don't know either. They may not realize that using your image that for their web campaign in print is actually a separate cost, and they may run that print campaign.
Yeah.
You might find out about it, and then what do? Is if your first port of call is to instantly pick up the phone to a lawyer, that could then ruin the relationship. Whereas if it's in black and white in front of them and say, look, I'm just going to draw your attention back to what you looked at before, please sort this out. It means you can have a conversation with them directly. You can assume the best, but prepare for the worst. And it just makes the whole situation smoother. I love that piece of advice. It's so practical.
Yeah. I think it's really the underlying principle is that age-old thing of don't be a dick. People want to work with nice people, and it's about fairness. Be fair, and I think conversations go a long way. But for going back to your point about doing the art buying role, the negotiating role between a business and the photographer, it does put me in a difficult thing. I'm being paid by the client, but yet I'm being, I've got a sort of duty of care to the photographer. And I think it just comes down to fairness. I'm always trying to get the best deal for what I think is fair for the photographer, but equally I have to be fair to the client as well. So for me, it's that balancing act. I don't have any allegiance either way. I'm definitely not going to be there to screw over the photographer, but I also don't want to screw over the client. So for me, it's that balancing act. But yeah, fairness. I think that's probably the key takeaway for me, being nice and being fair.
I think that's the line we need people to walk. Because if you're not looking to do the right thing for both sets of companies, you're never going to work again. And then the industry gets worse because we don't have you there trying to normalize things and make sure that prices stay reasonable for both sides, that budgets are getting used, but they're not getting abused. And honestly, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for you being here. Like, we're coming up to nearly an hour of recording now. You've been so generous with your time. And I think for me personally, and I'm sure for other people listening, this has been massively valuable. Just to make sure that people can get hold of you, can you talk a little bit about the best ways to get in touch and to access some of this education with you?
Absolutely. So you can find Wisern. We've talked a lot about Wisern today, but wisern.com, like I said, WISERN.com. And we are on Instagram as well, wisern.me. Do give us a follow. We're slowly building that up. So we're loving to see some new faces on there. I actually use that a lot for a lot of conversations happen on Instagram. So feel free to slide into our DMs. And Mother Bran, again, motherbran.com and Mother Bran on Insta. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect on there. I do think actually LinkedIn is a really, really useful space and underused for photographers. So another bit of advice would be get on LinkedIn and start connecting with all the people that you want to work with.
Here. More power to that. And thanks again for your time, Emma. It's been hugely appreciated. With that said, everybody, we'll see you again next week. And thanks again for listening in.
There's a lovely organisation called The Colour Balance, run by an amazing woman called Virgilia. And I quite often get my PAs, my production assistants from there. And they are not usually producers. Most people are photographers working, freelance photographers and crew looking for kind of assisting roles. But how do you get experience? If you're a freelance photographer, how do you get experience of being on set unless you are invited to be on set? So quite often I go into the database there and say, look, I've got this PA role, come and support me on set as a producer, but you're going to watch what it's like being on set. Come on set of like a BMW shoot or a, Foot Locker shoot or whatever, Bowers and Wilkins. Come on those sets and actually get a feel for what it's like, how people behave, how the dynamics are, how you work with the clients and stuff, just to try and embrace visibility within the industry. Because again, how do you know how to run a commercial shoot if you've never been on a commercial shoot, but you're an independent, you're a freelance photographer? Like, how are you getting that experience? So it's this awfully, again, you're hitting these blockers at every road. So yeah, I mean, definite shout out to the color balance. I think they're amazing what they're doing in terms of training and kind of getting people upskilled. So there's no excuse to not have diversity on set. Another one is actually the Photography
No, I
Foundation.
agree. I
Thinking
agree
about
with that.
young creatives, the Photography Foundation also run workshops for specifically for younger creatives. The two great resources.
I think one of the things that's, again, this is just being completely candid, like one of the things that's held me back previously is having been in some of those larger set situations. You have to practice those skills, because it's different to just turning up and like following your nose and discovering something creative on a smaller scale. And I think that large set management is definitely something you need to assess before you start pursuing that advertising work, because it's kind of a requirement. So for me, like a large part of why I ended up settling into kind of smaller scale corporate commercial and not going further into advertising is because that experience is so hard won. And especially if you're used to executing at a certain level, there's a chasm that needs to be crossed to get comfortable and work in those like higher end areas. And I do think that, again, it's a real credit that you kind of bringing that out. I'm really gutted that we ran out of time to talk about the way that you actually select creative for a job, but maybe that's a chat for another day.
Maybe.
Because I'd love to know more about how you go about choosing a good fit for a campaign.
Yeah.
Because that's fascinating to me.
Finding creatives and finding creatives, how creatives should be approaching people and getting themselves in front of the right people. And then, what you look for. Oh, so subjective. Interestingly, Jason Barron, who is the former head of photography at the BBC, I mean, he was saying, you look at a book, it's so subjective, but you look at a book and he might think it's amazing, or, and then you show it to someone else in the same team commissioning the same work and they're like, whatever, it's all right. It's so different what resonates and what really strikes a chord with different people. So yeah, and we've put work forward to clients before, like, this is the one, these guys are the one, they're going to be amazing, and they've chosen someone completely different. And you're like, how what so you put the wild card in
And
and they love it, and you
it
think
shocks me.
that's bonkers. So yeah, very subjective, it's completely open, which also just makes it really, really hard, but there's ways.
Honestly, it's been the same. There's photographers that I've followed for years, and I think their work is unlike anything else I've ever seen. And then when you have a conversation with them, you realize that they're not getting hired for these kinds of jobs, and it always boggles my mind, because they have the most honest, like down to earth, kind of amazing productions, but because the businesses that they're targeting don't have budget, they never get used to these campaigns. And again, it's that thing about not having a set. You could be the world's greatest food photographer, but if you're only working with a restaurant, it's unlikely you're going to then get hired by somebody working for Sakla, for example, or like some other large food brand. And one of the things that I really love is that there are some people that manage to cross that gap. Like there's Andrew Paynes, who did enormous campaigns for Levi. And essentially his entree to that was like following artists and producing a body of personal work that really spoke to him. And then Levi took a chance and essentially commissioned him to do a project that didn't really feature the products at all. And I think those kinds of campaigns are so interesting. But I'm really conscious I'm taking way too much of your time here.
I think that's why it's really important. Again, something we didn't touch on today, but I talk about a lot, is that idea of having a niche and sticking to your niche and really owning that space. Because if you stand for something, people will make the connection between they will often see things in your work that's applicable to their brand. So there's two parts. But if you are really vanilla, if you are everything to everybody, then you're nothing to anybody. Like, it doesn't. You've got to really have that style or whatever it is that you stick to your guns with, and then let other people see the connections in your work. That's fine. But if you're talking to a really unique audience, this is what I do, and I'm the solution for you. Other people can't. There was a great example a few years ago with children's advertising photographer, and she does really bright colors, and we'd used her for kids' work before, and in the ad agency, they said, actually, we're doing this. I think it was for an epilator, like a leg shaving epilator type thing, randomly. But it was legs against bright colours, and the connection was like dealing with skin tones, natural skin tones, beautiful, and bright poppy colours. And we made the leap and said, would you, I know it's not kids, but would you be interested in doing this job? And she was like, yeah, of course I would. So people will make the leap and the connection if you stand for something that is unique and strong and, and sit within a niche. So don't be afraid of kind of
That's awesome.
pushing work away. Work will find a way of finding you. Anyway,
that's awesome. I mean, as well, one of the things I was going to ask about that is we frequently have conversations on this podcast because a lot of the education that I do is around visual identity and trying to do this essentially. But an element that's always been missing is that obviously I don't know what an art buyer is looking for. I'm a photographer. So I can never know that because that's not the role that I'm in. But there's a lot of people that push quite hard into practices in the photography that would make working on a commercial set difficult. Things like insisting on shooting only film or like manual focus or like all these kinds of things. And it's always interesting to kind of hear how much you feel like clients would have to know about that stuff ahead of time if you're going to do something that's going to interrupt the flow of a normal shoot.
Definitely, they will have to, because if you want to, unless you're funding that film and print yourself and development yourself, it needs to be part of the thing. I've had a couple of photographers recently who both said, yes, we'll shoot digital, but our aesthetic is really shooting film, and we want to do that. And the clients were really pushing back. They just wanted to be able to see, there's a confidence to be able to see the work tethered on a laptop. So from them, they wanted to see that, but we agreed that they would shoot, I think it was 5 rolls of film. So we allowed in the estimate for the purchasing of the film and obviously a rush dev and scan. And interesting enough, one of the clients completely only went with the film at the end. The other one, for time reasons, we couldn't actually end up going down that route. But it came up both times with the same client. They're like, the photographer you've chosen has this aesthetic purely because they shoot film. Yes, we can do it in Digi, but they really want to. So we agreed a mix. But yeah, it's got to be a conversation up front.
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. And I think there's all sorts of people that are doing that. Like, anyway, I don't want to take any more of your time. I'm so grateful for the time
workshop now, so I am going to have to jump off, but busy morning.
No,
cool.
It's been amazing. Honestly, thank you again.
You're welcome.
I'll tag you in when I'll tag you in when we get all this stuff live. And again, thank you very much for your time. If you need anything from me, feel free to drop me a DM whenever. And actually, I think I might end up booking you for a little bit. Like for me, I'm trying to push the education side a little bit more at the moment. But if I'm ever doing commercial again, you're going to be my first port of call, because I think that
lovely.
I either need to move up or out, one of the two.
Well, it was fantastic to chat with you.
Thank you.
Say, if you want to do a round table, I'm always next couple of weeks are pretty busy, but after that I'll be around. Cool. Lovely to see you. Thank you, darling.
I'll get you a link out. See you soon. Goodbye, Emma. Bye.